Greetings, folks. Welcome to another one of our free Friday community classes right here on the Green Art channel. This week, I am excited to talk to you about a very nuanced topic with a lot of history and a lot of depth that we probably won't actually get into because I want to focus on just answering the question, which is, are there energetics, constitutional, temperamental, humoral energetics in traditional Anglo-Saxon Wortcunning herbalism? And the answer is no, right? And so let's unpack that a little bit because I think it's interesting. And then just to make things fun, we're going to bring in a third option to this energetics, no energetics, third option thing towards the end, which I think you'll think is really interesting. So first, energetics definitely made it into the English herbals, and we can see through a bunch of the different extant Materia Medica and Old English herbals that there are references to energetics. But those languages, those concepts are not native to that area or those traditions of practice. Rather, they were brought in and gifted through cultural exchange from the Greco-Roman traditions, from the actual temperamental and humoral traditions of ancient Greece and Rome. So I find that very fascinating. I think it's super cool when we see these examples of different, maybe loosely related because they are both technically children of the Indo-European parent culture, but loosely related, but still divergent cultures sharing information and seeing that information land in the receptive culture in a way where it becomes super relevant to the bioregion, to the climate, to the plants, to the people, and all of that. It's very cool. And when you follow the path of energetics as they move from Eastern wisdom into Northern European Materia Medica and medicinal practice, we see that happen. And it's very cool, and it's totally worth nerding out about if you are into that. If for nothing else, to teach us what syncretism through the lens of animism and appropriate cultural exchange can look like, right? That it is possible for us to learn from one another, to adopt one another's practices, to be inspired by one another, and have it not be the same thing as cultural appropriation, right? It's a totally different thing than that. So it's a cool thing. So energetics, no, not native to Northern European herbal practice, but we do see it show up as information is exchanged between the continental and especially Greco-Roman practices. Now, what does that say about Wortcunning? What does that say about the traditional magico-medicinal herbal ways of the Germanic world, the Scandinavian, Norse, and Old English? Does it mean that these systems are not based? Does it mean that they're basic because they don't have the language of energetics? Absolutely not. They have something else, which is deep relationship with plants. So when we look at the Greco-Roman Materia Medica, we see plants talked about in terms of their humors, their temperaments, their energetics. And you know, if you've been around here for very long, that I also use those languages. I've adopted those languages and a four-element model anyway, earth, air, fire, water, but still temperamental and humoral in nature and in inspiration. But when we read the texts that are native to Northern Europe, specifically around herbs and medicine and magic, rather than seeing the herbs broken down into hot, cold, wet, dry, we see them talked about as persons. This plant has this personality, and when they show up in a space, this is what happened. And when we charm them and invoke them in this way, this is how we get them to show up. So it's just a difference in approach. One is exploring plant personality through the nuanced language of energetics. One is exploring plant personality through more mythopoetic language and more charm and invocatory language. And what I think is that there's a way that we can hold both of them in our hands at the same time, right? We can use, and this is how I teach, right? When you come to my classes and do courses with me, this is how you learn from me, that we start out with botany and bioregional plant lore, and then we move into energetics to start to learn that every plant has personality, they have spirit, they have presence, and that we have to speak about them in ways that go beyond reductionist, this herb for this issue thing. And then from there, we move into what I personally consider a deeper aspect of the plant spirit path of Wortcunning, which is engaging directly with the spirit of the plant and allowing the plant to teach us directly in these visionary spirit to spirit kinds of ways. And that is ultimately how we see the practice of Wortcunning, especially when we're able to go into the native, herbal books and traditions around cunning folk in those particular parts of the world. So somebody else could flip that and say, I think that it's beginner, it's introductory to think of the plants as people and to engage with them spirit to spirit, and then learn the language of their energetics for clinical application. And that's totally valid too. Just the way that I practice, the way I think and feel about it, and the way that I teach it is energetics as an introductory language first, as a segue into person to person, spirit to spirit, heart to heart communication with the plants in kinship, right? And then we're allowing for the plants to speak directly to the situation, to speak directly to the person in question or the issue in question. And that requires a lot more work, in my opinion. It requires us to create a space, to have a set and scene where we are open to any of the plants in our repertoire, any of the plants that we're in deep kinship with, to be able to step in and say, here's how I can help bring harmony, bring rightness into this situation. And so it's not just formulation. It's not just assessment based on temperament or humoral attributes, which is all very powerful. And when we talk about this third thing in a second, you'll see why it's very powerful, right? But rather, it's this more intuitive, in the moment type of thing that is based on the most ancient spiritual tradition in the world, which is sacred reciprocity. It's based on us being in kinship with the plants, with individual specific plants that we're close to, but also with the plant spirits all. So putting a pin in that, there is a third option, right? We have approaching herbal medicine and magic through energetics, through the language of temperament and constitution. We have approaching herbal medicine and magic through direct kinship with individual plants and the plant spirits all. And then we have the third option, which is a reductionist, allopathic approach to herbal medicine and herbal magic. And what that looks like is I open up a book on herbalism and I look up herbs that are good for the lungs, and I see a list of 10 herbs that are good for the lungs, and 3 of those herbs I have on hand. So I take those herbs to address the respiratory condition that I currently have. This is bad herbalism, right? I'll just say it. It's my opinion. And that's what I think, because it's a crapshoot at best. It's 50-50 on a good day, right? When we think about herbs that are good for a body system or good for a particular topic like abundance or protection or love, what we're actually seeing is herbs that have an affinity for that function, right? They're herbs that when we bring them into our body, they tend to move into the lungs. We're herbs that when we work with them ritually, they tend to move into the segues and paths of abundance and plenty. So we know that the plants have an affinity for those spaces and that naturally they'll want to move into those spaces because there's resonance and alignment for them. But what we don't know is how they're going to get there and what they're going to do when they get there. So for example, one of my favorite herbs to pick on is mullein. Everybody knows mullein, right? Verbascum thapsus. And we know that mullein is one of the superstar champion celebrity herbs that is good for the lungs. We know that mullein moves directly into the lungs, that tons of herbalists put mullein in every respiratory formula they do. But that doesn't tell us anything other than that the full force of mullein's power will move into the lungs. We also want to know, what will mullein do when they move into the lungs? What will be the path of action, right? And we know that mullein is an extremely demulcent herb, that especially when taken as tea or steam, there is a mucilage that exudes from the fibers of that plant, making mullein very wet. It's a very moistening, very mucilaginous herb. So mullein moves into the lungs and brings dampness and wetness into the lungs. So if somebody has a dry, hot, seized, hacking cough, Mullen makes sense. We would want to go in and soothe, coat, cool, and lubricate the lungs. But what if somebody has a wet, rattly cough where there's a bunch of fluid building up in the lungs, and they open the book and the book says mullen's a good herb for the lungs, and they're like, I have mullen, so I'm going to put this wet herb that moves into my lungs onto a wet condition in my lungs. What we see is that the problem aggravates. Sometimes for a day or two, things will feel a little better, like, ooh, something's changing, something's loosening, something's adjusting, and then all of a sudden, the issue gets driven into a deeper tissue level, or the issue exacerbates, or it moves from one body system outward into a different body system, or inward into a different body system. And that's problematic. And then the person has to go to an actual herbalist, or they go to an allopathic, a doctor, a physician, to figure it out, because now they're super sick, right? And it leaves a bad taste in their mouth. They say, I heard mullen was good for lung stuff, and I had this lung stuff, and I took mullen, and the next day I was in the ER because I couldn't breathe, right? Or the next day everything was worse, and my head was cloudy, and I was anxious, and all these things fell apart. So then that person has this bad feeling about herbal medicine, and we kind of lose somebody who's interested in this and wants to work with the plants. So that's also an option, but again, not a good option. It's very reductionist. It takes plants away from their personhood. It assumes that every herb is right for every body, which removes humans from their sovereignty and from our uniqueness. And it really numbs the ability for there to be kinship and conversation, because we're just looking at what herb is good for what issue, and then we're throwing said herb at said issue and kind of expecting something to happen when there's no kinship, there's no personality, there's no reciprocity, and there's no understanding of the deeper language and nuances of both the disharmony in the person's body or in their life, and then the personality of the plant. That's what makes exceptional herbalism, right? Is when somebody has put the years, often decades of work into understanding anatomy, pathology, physiology, energetic anatomy, right? And then also understanding all the same things about our plant allies. And when you know both of those things, it's very, very powerful and very intuitive to make a link between them and say, oh, this person's having this constellation of experiences. We don't even need to put a disease name on it, because that doesn't matter. It's part of allopathic medicine. We need to know what the person's experiencing. And then from our repertoire of herbs, we understand which herb that we're in relationship with, we can gift to the person to address that constellation of symptoms that they're experiencing. And always remembering symptoms are omen. Symptoms are language, right? Here's a little tangent, little sidebar. Symptoms are just the way the body and the world around us are communicating with us. They're letting us know something's wrong. Things are not flowing in the right way. There's not peace and plenty in a particular part of the body system or the life path. So when we talk about, in Wortcunning, treating the symptom, it sounds very allopathic. It sounds like all we're doing is symptom suppression. We're not getting to the root of things. But what we're actually doing is meeting the person where they are, and we're honoring what the person's body is communicating. We're starting there. We're saying, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what we're going to address and what we're going to treat. And we see that in most all of the remedies and charms in the Wortcunning texts, right? That the person is presenting this specific thing they have going on. It's a case study, right? And the cunning person says, okay, this is how we're going to respond to what you're feeling. And what we know happens next is the peeling of the onion. By meeting the person where they are, what they're exhibiting, what the body wisdom is communicating, what the life path is communicating, how omen is showing up, we actually end up going deeper and deeper and deeper towards the root cause, towards the root imbalance. And that's only if that's even necessary. A lot of times we find that by treating what we see, by addressing the omen that appears, we actually provide the body, the system, the life path with the information, wisdom, compassion that it needs in order to address the root cause, which is just a mirror of the symptom anyway, right? They're related. The root cause is never going to be dramatically different than the symptom. They're always going to be symbolically connected. So if we treat the symptom appropriately, we are actually working on the deeper energetic disharmony that is represented in the root issue. So this is our approach, our style of working with herbal medicine, the green art tradition of Wortcunning, and I think it's fascinating. So a few people as of late have asked me, are there energetics in Wortcunning? How come I'm reading this, Bald's Leech book or Laknunga or any of the herbarium or whatever, and I'm not seeing them talk about herbs with this language that we're accustomed to using as herbalists? And the answer is because it's not there, but something else is there. And if you can do both, if you're able to study and learn and have some, good expertise on both things, that's awesome. And if not, I would say the goal should always be right relationship and kinship with the plant. So hopefully that was interesting to you. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I see you guys next time.